And the floor is yours.
Okay. Uh, Hello, everybody who's here. I am Mistress Sabine Lefebvre de Armagnac within the SCA. I honestly don't know exactly how long I've been playing. Anywhere probably between 15 and 20, maybe over 20 years. I'm not sure without going back and looking at my AOA. One of my first offices within the society was local Exchequer. So I've been involved in various aspects of the Exchequer branch of the SCA off and on throughout my entire SCA career. And last year, a friend of mine who's been a past Kingdom Exchequer uh, convinced me to apply for the Kingdom Exchequer position. And so I stepped into this office in October last year during the office transitioned at Crown Tournament. So I've been in the office, oh, I say last year, 2019, October 2019. I have to remember it is 2021. So I've been in the office over a year now, so I'm over halfway through in my tenure. This year's been, of course, very different than what would normally occur for some of the Exchequer activities, but I'm going to give a basic rundown of some of the duties and responsibilities that I have as Kingdom Exchequer, and then, of course, open the floor for any questions that anybody may have in regards to this office. So the Kingdom Exchequer in general is basically responsible for the financial activity of the kingdom. So basically, I'm the one who holds the checkbook, so to say, for the SCA. Or for the Kingdom of Onstiora, actually. And to hold a kingdom office, I had to, of course, fill out an application, and that application was submitted not only to the local officers in Crown here, but also to society. So my warrant actually comes directly from society, not from the Crown or the Seneschal here in Onstiora. So a little bit higher process there for a kingdom officer to be selected. So I am responsible for managing our ledger and our checkbook and our bank account and filling out monthly reports and quarterly reports on the financial state of our kingdom. And depending on what goes on in any given month, the expenses or income that the kingdom receives can vary pretty widely. Most of what we've been doing in the last year has been in regards to heraldic submissions because we haven't had in-person events and things of that nature. But in general, it's processing deposits from various activities within the kingdom and then working with the financial committee to get any of our expenses approved and then disbursements sent to those requesting reimbursement or to make payments for the general operating expenses of our kingdom. In addition to just managing the day-to-day financial ins and outs of our kingdom account, other things that I'm responsible for on a yearly basis is working with the great officers of state to develop a annual budget. And that's usually done in the fall for the next year. Currently, I'm in the process of reviewing our Kingdom financial policy, which also comes up for review on a recurring basis and making any changes that are necessary for that based on either society changes in either society financial policy or society law, or even if there's been some changes to kingdom law that may affect the financial policy. So that's another thing that kind of falls under my plate and my purview as something that I'm responsible for. The other responsibility is every 6 months or so, whenever we host a roundtable for the officers within our kingdom, I'm the one who I wouldn't say develops, but when we're in person, usually I have to pull together handouts to pass out and things of that nature, but I'm the one who is responsible for having the classes for our officers at Roundtable for the Exchequer branch. So that's kind of one of those responsibilities that is important, but not as something that's kind of on a daily basis. So in addition to some of those things that fall directly within my purview, I, as well as the seneschal in some ways of a local group, if one of the deputies or other officers isn't reporting, it falls under, it's ultimately my responsibility. So any deputy that is associated with the Exchequer branch, whether it be a regional officer or one of the other officers, it's ultimately my responsibility to make sure anything associated with that deputy position gets completed. And currently within the Kingdom of Onstiora, the Exchequer branch has, we have 3 regional deputies, one for the Northern region, Central region, and Southern. And they all report directly to me. They're kind of my more eyes and ears directly on the ground, interacting with the local groups, because the Kingdom Exchequer doesn't necessarily have that detailed information about the local groups that the regionals have, because they're positioned within that area. So they're always a very big resource for the Kingdom Exchequer to know what's going on within the region with those local groups. And then I have 4 or 5 deputies. Sometimes I have to think how many deputies I have. One of them is our PayPal deputy, and they deal with PayPal responsibilities. So I work with them on the PayPal account information, because I actually complete the reports that are sent to the Society PayPal deputy in regards to the activity that is on our account for PayPal. But they set up the actual events and things like that. So they do the actual running of that and then work with me on any information I may need in regards to that PayPal activity. And then I have a Doomsday deputy, which is the deputy that's getting ready to gear up right now. They work on our consolidated kingdom report for society and corporate. So they gather all the local group information and put it into a report. And so I work with them on any hiccups they may have in getting reporting. I actually served as Doomsday deputy for the kingdom prior to coming in as Kingdom Exchequer. So I'm familiar with how that report works, so I can give assistance to the current Doomsday deputy. And again, if something happens, it's ultimately my responsibility to make sure that report gets completed and to corporate on time. And then I have a Chamberlain, and the Chamberlain deputy is responsible for the kingdom property. So the property that the Crown and Coronet used during their tenure in office, plus other property that is owned by the kingdom, is managed by the Chamberlain. And in addition, if they have any issues with needing to get things replaced or repaired or things of that nature, I work with them to make sure that those are handled. I know I probably, it's like I know I have another deputy in there. NMR, which started out as NMS, non-member surcharge, is now, they've termed it differently, is now NMR. So I do have an NMR deputy, and they handle a lot of the event reports and deposits and things of that nature for me, and they send a report to me on a monthly basis. So one of the nice things about Onstiora is the Exchequer office does have some of those deputies, which takes some of the reporting off of the Kingdom Exchequer, which I'm very thankful for, because there are other kingdoms where the Exchequer, they do that doomsday report. They handle their NMR. I think most of them have a PayPal deputy, so that kind of a responsibility is shifted off. But I'm so thankful to have some of those deputies, because it does mean that I can concentrate my efforts into really managing the day-to-day issues that come up with the financial issue. And I don't really want to say issues. I don't like the word issues. The financial situations that come up with our kingdom. It allows me the opportunity to answer emails, to ask questions of society or corporate, on behalf of the local or regional exchequers and things of that nature. So it allows me to handle that and not have to be as worried about getting a report submitted on time by having some of those deputies beneath me. A lot of what I spend my time on is generating the reports for the kingdom and managing that aspect of our finances, and then just answering emails and making sure that I'm there to support my regionals or even support the locals, and then answering any questions that are sent to me by either society or the corporate office. So a lot of my interaction is with the people above me who are asking questions and trying to make sure that I provide them with the answers for their inquiries. And sometimes that means that I'm going back to my deputies or going back to local groups and gathering that information and then sending it up. One of the things that I have learned in this office is you have to be very neutral in what you're doing. And that being, in a normal situation, our crown changes every 6 months. So you have different personalities coming in to your financial committee every 6 months. And making sure that they understand our financial policy and society's rules on how we spend our money and do our finances and record our activity. So I found that in this job, as long as you're professional, you just maintain that professional relationship with whoever's sitting on the throne, whoever is the current kingdom seneschal. You can work through any issues that come up. What I think is a little different for the Exchequer branch versus maybe some of the other kingdom officers is we have very black and white, for the most part, some very black and white rules, where some of the other officers, things might be a little bit more gray. But because this is related to finances, we have IRS regulations that we have to follow. And some of those are getting a little bit more, in some ways, a little bit more restrictive, but then they're also finding other ways to where we've been recording things maybe a little bit too restrictive in some areas and maybe not restrictive enough in other areas. So that's another thing, just working with corporate to make sure that our reports are falling in line with what are required to maintain our 5013C status. There are a lot of resources, of course, to help with that. And I will be upfront with saying, I read through the documentation before I came into the office and before I applied for the office. I read through, of course, our kingdom law, our kingdom financial policy, the SCA financial policy, corporate law. And I have also read through the Exchequer handbook. I cannot retain that information. I do not have an encyclopedic brain. I can't just recall those things off the top of my head. But knowing those resources are there and that I can refer back to them is really been a safety net for me. And anybody coming into this office, I would advise them, don't feel that you have to immediately have an answer to a question that somebody's asked you. Don't be afraid to say, I remember reading something about that, or I'm not certain about that particular situation. Let me research it. And use the resources that are available to you. They're there for a reason. I will also give kudos to what I would consider my upline, that being the Society Exchequer, the corporate treasurer, and now since Kingdom finances are utilizing QuickBooks, their QuickBooks deputy. They are very quick to respond for the most part on any question I ask. They've never made me feel like I've asked a dumb question in regards to finances or policy or anything of that nature. So that's another, that would be something I would definitely want to pass on to whoever comes into this office next, is utilize those resources and don't feel that you have to go it alone. These people are very giving people, and they have never made me feel, again, like I've asked a stupid question, because the handbooks and the policies are written very general and very broadly, and we've had a lot of situations come up over the last couple of years that weren't even thought about when some of these policies were written. So knowing that those people are there makes the job easier, because you don't have to have everything memorized. And after you've used the resource, if you still have questions, you can send them an email and they will walk through it with you, and make sure that you have a better grasp of how to handle a particular situation. So again, most of my time is spent on email and in Excel doing reports. So that's a lot of where I accomplish my task. To hold this office, I would definitely recommend having a good understanding of Excel. That's currently still the reporting forms that our local groups use, and our regionals use an Excel form to do their reports. NMR uses an Excel report form. A lot of the forms that we use are generated in Excel and set up in Excel. So I highly encourage anybody coming into even just a local Exchequer, but definitely in Kingdom, to have a strong working knowledge of Excel. That doesn't mean you need to understand all the background stuff, like how the macros work and things of that nature, because those are set up and established at corporate. Because I don't understand all the background things for Excel. Anytime it breaks, I send it to our corporate treasurer, because she fixes it, because it's a locked form that we typically use. And they want us to use the locked form specifically for that purpose so that we don't break things. And then some of the other things required to hold office would be the ability to be contacted, have reliable internet, a phone, and things of that nature. I will say that most, if not, I'd say probably 90% of the activity that I do as Kingdom Exchequer is through email. There are some texts, some phone calls, and things of that nature, but a majority of it is handled through email, because that creates a chain, so that you can keep track of things that have been discussed. I've been fortunate that I haven't needed to really step in and deal with any kind of interpersonal issues within the groups or between groups and the regionals. So I've been very fortunate. I know sometimes other Kingdom Exchequers have had some of those issues arise, but again, that's where you just try and remain a neutral party and work through the situation. Trying to think. It seems like there's a part of me when Kat asked me to do this, I'm like, well, I don't really know what all to say in regards to what the Kingdom Exchequer does, because it seems like I spend a lot of time doing things for the office, but trying to define those sometimes is a little difficult. For the most part, I do check my Kingdom Exchequer email on a daily basis to make sure there aren't any things that need to be immediately addressed. I do try and cut out a chunk of time every day, at least during the week, to sit down and work on Exchequer activities. I feel that if I try and break up some of those activities, it makes the job a little bit easier to tackle. That whole, little bit of the elephant at a time, so that it doesn't stack up. I will say that I do, and I think this is probably more a personal thing than has to do with the office. I do feel like I'm constantly behind on my duties, and I think that's a personal thing and not necessarily a thing with the office. But if you set time frames and know when your reports are due at the end of every month and things of that nature, you can very easily get into a routine with this, to make it a little bit easier to manage, except for and that way when your fires do pop up, they're not hopefully derailing any of the other functions of the office. There are other responsibilities with this office in regards to eventing. So as Kingdom, I just thought about this because of, I'm on the Society for Creative Anachronism page right now. I have it pulled up on my other screen, and it's either a scene from Gulf Wars Merchants Row or maybe Pennsic Merchants Row. It's Merchants Row at some event. So that triggered my thought on that. Is as Kingdom Exchequer, there is a requirement to attend certain events, or if you cannot, to send a proxy on your behalf. As Kingdom Exchequer, for Onsteora, since Onsteora is a primary in Gulf Wars, you are also part of the Gulf Wars Financial Committee. So you receive emails regarding the finances of Gulf Wars, and you vote on those finances, financial decisions, and things of that nature. Which also, because they hold a financial committee meeting at the event, it is requested that you be there or send a proxy to attend that meeting on your behalf. I know for the most part, I think the Kingdom Exchequers tend to attend Gulf Wars. I know for me, I kind of had that mapped out before I even took the office, knowing of that requirement. I already knew that I was going to have to block out that time to attend Gulf Wars. And then it's best for you to attend crown tournaments, coronations, and roundtables are the other events that I would highly recommend. I don't know if it's written anywhere that that's an actual requirement, but I would recommend that you attend, because at Crown Tournament, that gives you an opportunity to meet the incoming heirs that are chosen that day. Of course, Coronation, sometimes there's a great officers meeting at Coronation after their majesties, or, after the transition of the thrones, of the crowns. And then, of course, roundtable, because there's a great officers of state meeting at that, and then being responsible for training your new officer corps or being there to answer any questions that your officers may have during the local and regionals meeting. I think those are the only events that I can actually think of that attending would either be required or highly recommended. Of course, if it's a kingdom level event that's actually being run by the kingdom, it would be best for the Kingdom Exchequer to be there as well to assist with that. There's very few times, I think, when we've actually had a kingdom hosted or run event. Generally, they try and find a local group to actually put in a bid for those kingdom level events and to actually host it and run it through their accounts. Makes it a little bit easier. Trying to think of what else I feel that I do. I think at this time, if anybody has any questions, if you guys are able to, you can go ahead and unmute and ask questions if you like. I'm trying to figure out if Kat is frozen or not. I think Kat may be frozen. Oh no. Okay, I was gonna say I don't. Did you get unmuted or are you still muted?
I got unmuted.
Awesome. Okay.
Okay. I am the freshly minted Exchequer for the Barony. So I'll be attending your class, I guess, on February 12th for warranting.
Okay.
What preparation should I work on to get ready for that warranting class?
Oh, okay. That's actually a good question. So some of the resources that I mentioned that I use, that are the resources I always mention in my classes, is from the SCA.org website or the Kingdom website. So on the Kingdom website, there's a document library, or also even under the Exchequer, you can get to it. I would read the Kingdom financial policy. And then if you have time, reading Kingdom law is always a good background to have. But the financial policy is going to be directly related to the Exchequer branch. The one that's currently on our website is from 2018. It is set up in our policy to be reviewed every 2 years. So it was scheduled to be reviewed in 2020. So it was supposed to be reviewed last July. However, last year, the society or corporate sorry, my words are failing me a little bit. I apologize. Kind of sent down to us a dictated format of how they wanted those policies set up. And so with everything else, I've been working to get that transitioned into the new format and get that baseline. So that financial policy review has gotten pushed to this year. But the 2018 one is up there, and that's the one, of course, that is currently in effect until we get the new one reviewed and released. So I would read that. And then from the SCA.org website, there is the Society Financial Policy, which is going to be a little bit broader than our Kingdom one because Society, they have to cover all the kingdoms across the known world. So they can't be very restrictive because each state or locale or things of that nature may have different regulations. And so therefore, that's why the Kingdom financial policies have to be tailored a little bit more. But that one's a good one because there are some things that it helps you to kind of see where maybe some of the Kingdom policies came from, like what its base format was by reading the Society financial policy. And then the one thing that I highly recommend, and it's one of the things that whenever I ask questions, Society Exchequer refers back to, there is a Society Exchequer's handbook.
Yeah, I saw that. It's 247 pages.
Yes, it is a very lengthy document, and I actually had it printed at one time, and I've decided I've stopped printing. At one time, I did have a notebook, and in it I had the Society financial policy, the Kingdom law, Kingdom financial policy, and that Exchequer's handbook. I'm like, this is like my Bible for the Exchequer. and then I think I had some things in there about PayPal and stuff like that. I had just all these little dividers, and I had that for a while, and then I thought, I don't use this book really when I'm out and about, and I have my phone with me all the time. Or if I'm at a meeting like roundtable, I usually have my laptop. It's like, it really is much easier to just access these things electronically to make sure that I am getting the latest and information. And so a lot of times when I will ask questions, they will refer back to some section in that Exchequer's handbook versus referring me to society financial policy or society law or anything like that. They'll refer to that handbook quite often because it gives a lot of examples on certain situations. To me, that handbook tells more of the do's and don'ts and the how-tos than the policy does. And so that's why I, in reviewing our financial policy, I really want to cross-reference some of these other documents and review some of these other documents and pull some of that information into our policy to make it a little bit easier to locate, instead of having to go back and reference something else. So those would be the 4 things that I refer to and I would recommend reading. So Kingdom Law, Kingdom Financial Policy, Society Financial Policy, and then that Society Exchequer's Handbook.
Okay.
Because those are the 4 things that I find myself going back to a lot. So the 2 things that we do for Exchequer warranting is there'll be a 1-hour class on the financial policy. So I'll hit the highlights of that because we're all adults and I'm not going to sit there and read that entire thing to everybody. I'm going to hit what I feel are the important aspects of that, the things that I feel are important, about your bank account structure or how things get processed, that kind of thing. So I'm going to hit the highlights of the financial policy because that class is attended by Exchequers and Seneschals and then any B&Bs. And then anybody that's technically on your financial committee should sit in on that financial policy class. That's a little bit harder to police, but it's good information for them to have because if they're on your financial committee, them knowing the policies that affect how you're spending your money is always a good base to have. And then the second class we have the Exchequers attend is the actual what we call the forms class, and that's where we're actually going to talk about that report. And so we're going to go through that report and highlight the different pages and the information that is inputted into that Excel document. So that class is a little bit longer because we actually do go into a little bit more specifics about some of the forms because that's a lot of what the local Exchequer, I say a lot, I mean, that's a very big part of what the local Exchequer does is completing that report on a monthly basis. So basically, as Kingdom Exchequer, I do some of the exact same functions that a local Exchequer does with managing a ledger, managing the checkbook, writing checks, reconciling a bank statement, doing that report. So it's just, I'm doing it for a different account that probably has a lot more activity than a local branch would. So, yeah, I do some of the very same functions that a local Exchequer does.
Now, does you as the Kingdom Exchequer, do you just go online, pull up the account so you can reconcile everything electronically so it's more immediate? Or is it old school? You wait for the statement to come in and...
It's old school in the fact that I wait till the statement, I get an email notification on usually because our account is set up to go from the first of the month to the end of the month to make our reporting easier to reconcile. So when the bank statement is ready, usually on about, I want to say the 3rd of the month, I'll get an email that says, hey, you're like for, so like next week, I'll get an email that says, hey, your January statement is available. I can log into our bank account and download a copy, a PDF copy of our bank statement for the month of January. And then I basically save that into the cloud for the account. I actually save it onto a drive with all the reports. I have a little folder for all our bank statements and everything. And then I then make sure everything's been entered into the ledger based on my check register or my deposit slips. I make sure my ledger's all up to date. I make sure that I look at what has cleared the bank. I mark in the ledger that this cleared and what month it cleared in, so I know what's still outstanding. And then from that, I generate that Excel report form. Even though we've moved to QuickBooks, I'm still doing the Excel form because I like having that safety net of seeing that Excel report that I'm familiar with, and then being able to take that report and that ledger, generate my QuickBooks reports, and see, kind of do that comparison, that checks and balances between, here's my Excel form, it says I'm balanced, it says I'm good to go, I've got everything entered, everything's good on that. Okay, here's my QuickBooks. I've reconciled the bank statement with QuickBooks, and QuickBooks and my report and my ledger are all saying the same thing. Okay, I feel comfortable that my reports are good. So I am still using that Excel report as a safety net. I don't know if the other kingdoms are. They haven't told us yet not to be doing the Excel report. So until corporate says, don't submit that Excel report, move totally to QuickBooks and generating reports out of QuickBooks, I'm going to continue to do it. So I can go in and look at our bank account on a daily basis, but to be honest, because of when our reports are generated, what our reporting schedule is, I don't go in there and check it that often. I just go in there unless I'm looking for something, a deposit to clear or something that I'm trying to watch for. I just wait till the bank statement drops and I get the email announcement and pretty much do the same process a local group would do.
Now, how electronic is the movement? Because like my kids, I'm 61. My kids' generation does nothing with cash or checks. Nothing. Everything is card. So how is SCA moving towards electronic banking for this generation?
We are not very quickly. I will be honest with you, we are not very quickly. EFTs or electronic fund transfers are addressed in the society financial policy, and you have to set those up and have those approved by corporate. Like for us to even have a PayPal account, because that's electronic funds transfers, we had to get authorization from corporate to set up a PayPal account for the kingdom. And then, of course, we established a PayPal deputy. They had to go through some training with the society PayPal deputy and all that. So there were some hoops we had to jump through there. Because of our requirements for paper trail, so our accounts can't have a credit card. Like your personal account, you probably have a debit card, which is either a MasterCard or Visa that you use most often when you go shopping. Group accounts and the Kingdom account can't have a credit card because there's no way to have that paper trail of, hey, where's the check request for this where's the
Mhm.
expense request for this money that you spent on this credit card, and where's your receipt, and where's your approvals, and is that budgeted? And so there's that paper trail that they want to see. So doing any kind of electronic funds transfers are very limited and very difficult. They have recently, because of the pandemic, allowed groups. I don't think very many groups have done this, but I did have a group in Onstiora ask about deposits, because some bank accounts have it to where if you take a picture of the check, you can do a deposit, electronically. So they have allowed for groups to do that. They said just make sure you make a note on the check somewhere, like deposited electronically on this date, etc., so that you don't try and inadvertently double deposit that, like do the electronic deposit and then at some point try and go to the bank and deposit that check. So they have allowed us to do a few things like that due to the pandemic. But there was an email a few months back, I think, about payment or reimbursement for something, and they said, no, you still have to use a check to do that. They said a check can be completed and mailed to a second signatory, and then that second signatory sign it and then mail it to whoever the person is being reimbursed if you physically can't get together to do the dual signatures. So they pretty much nixed doing anything but checks for reimbursements pretty quick from corporate and from society. So I think, unfortunately, the SCA is going to be continue to be a paper check institution for a while. I know there's a lot of people who would like to move away from that.
What about at events for people paying fees?
There is some movement with the possibility of being able to accept electronic payment at gate. There's been some discussion about that with the use of PayPal through the PayPal system. I don't know how much traction it's got because it was starting to be discussed. Then the pandemic came in, and a lot of things have kind of been pushed to the back burner. I know that the current PayPal deputy, she was looking into some of that, of being able to, how much it would cost to get the little attachments to be able to run the credit cards and things of that nature at gate.
I got one for free. Actually, I got two of them for free from PayPal.
Nice.
Just because I have a small business account, and it's super,
nice.
You pop it on and you're off and running,
Yeah, so I know she was looking, I think she may have reached out to PayPal and inquired about that. So there's been some discussion about that. I'm hoping within this next year, there'll be some more guidance on that, because there's basically two systems. I can't think of a better word. Two systems that the SCA has been working with over the last year to year and a half. So at one time, Onstiora had ASAPs, and then when that got discontinued and they moved to PayPal, I know that took a little bit of a while for that to get set up. And so a lot of kingdoms moved to having PayPal to do in advance event registrations. And then I want to say a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, SCA from the corporate level, introduced what's called SCARS, SCA reservation system. SCARS for short, and they used that for Gulf Wars in 2019, I believe. And then maybe for a Penzic or maybe some other war. I'm not exactly sure. So that's another system that's being discussed. And what they're, I think, trying to do is define when each system will be used, because it's my understanding that SCARS is just for advanced reservations. It's not for anything at the door. And then we've been using PayPal to do advanced reservations only. Well, if this new system SCARS comes online, which is going to be a more global type of system, which will allow the users to go in and basically register for events across kingdom lines and pay in advance their registrations, then that may be how all our groups start to handle their advanced reservations, and then look at using PayPal as a more at the door only type of service, because there's some restrictions that corporate wants to, or some, I don't, maybe restrictions isn't the right word, some guidelines on how to use those systems in tandem with each other. And so that's why I think they're looking at more with SCARS being advance only type of event registration, and PayPal, if a kingdom decides to keep PayPal and not go solely to SCARS, use PayPal for an at the door electronic payment. So there's some things that have been discussed and are being investigated and researched. It's just, like I said, unfortunately with the pandemic, I think that kind of pushed some of the timeline back on some of these things being rolled out. And so probably a little bit of the momentum may have just waned a little bit. But hopefully that momentum will kick back up as we get closer to hopefully having in-person events. I like the idea of SCARS, of being able to go and log into a system with my membership ID. You know how I log into the SCA on the SCA website anyway, and being able to say, oh, hey, I want to go to this event in Callantyre. I'm going to go to these two events in Onsteora. And oh, look, I can go ahead and register for Gulf Wars and be able to do it all in one transaction, and know that, and to be able to say, oh, hey, I've already done the event registration for my next 4 events, and I don't have to worry about it. I don't have to worry about having cash when I get to gate. I don't have to worry about whether, any of the other things associated with gating. And I just got to show up, show my membership ID, get my site token, and I'll be on my happy merry way. So I'm kind of excited that I know they've been working on that SCARS system, and I'm looking forward to it becoming having a bigger role in how we do our advanced registrations.
I think that works for you and I, or the people that are on this call.
Yeah.
I just find that the younger generations in general are more immediate. Oh, there's a thing tomorrow. Let's go.
Yeah, they're not as big.
They're not planners.
No, I know that. Oh, well, let's see, and so this is telling on myself just a little bit. So I had a milestone birthday yesterday. I turned the big 50 yesterday.
Mazel tov.
Thank you. The AARP letter kind of threw me, because I didn't think you could join at 50. I thought you had to be older.
No, I was in AARP at 42 because my husband turned 50. So I've been in AARP for almost 20 years.
Well, see, and my husband's been 50 for a couple of years. And when he got it, he's like, I'm not joining this. I'm not that old. And then I got it and I started looking at it and I'm like, hey, there's some discounts here.
Get auto insurance. We save $500 a year on our auto insurance going through AARP.
Nice. So, but I think I'm a planner. And so, and I've always been that way. Even when I was younger, I'm always a planner. I like to know what I'm doing, when I'm going. Yeah, I like to have my life planned out, which I will say, being Kingdom Exchequer, my life is not as planned out some days as I would like for it to be, but some days you just go with the flow. And so, yeah, we have even some of our 30 somethings here in our group that's how they roll. It's like Thursday evening, they're like, hey, who all's going to the event this weekend? Or they get off work on Friday and they're like, oh, the event's like 4 hours away. I'm getting in my car right now. And I just don't function that way. That's just not how I roll. So I think the exploration of having that advance and then really looking at using a system to take electronic payments at the door will help start to propel us into the future a little bit more, or to get more in line with some of the banking and payment habits of the younger generation. And I think that's something that the SCA needs to address if we do want to keep some of these some of this younger generation in, because you're right, they don't travel with cash. They don't.
I don't either. I mean, I have checks because I just do, mostly for SCA. I use it for SCA and I use it with my nail tech. And that's really it. The rest of the time, it's card everywhere.
I rarely write a check. I rarely do because I have everything I pay online.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I almost
Exactly.
never write a check.
And it's just, that's the way it is. I do have a question.
Okay.
About the antiquated payment deal with name and device submissions.
Heraldry. I love it.
And right now we're still doing the antiquated, write a check to the Exchequer and then the Exchequer sends it up. And in fact, the next 2-3 weeks, SCA College of Arms is going to do payment, electronic payment.
Yep.
We really need electronic payment for the heraldic submissions because it's very slow.
Yes.
Your Exchequer setting it up, and then the herald setting their stuff up, and
yeah,
it's a real pain in the butt.
No, I agree. And I have actually been into a little bit of discussion. I do not know all the names of the heraldic offices. I will apologize in advance, but the great officer in the heralds, the person in the heraldry office that sits on the great officers of state, Elena,
yeah,
we have been in conversations about heraldry submissions and heraldry payments, more in regards to payments. I have inquired. I actually sent an email to the Kingdom Exchequers group asking other Kingdom Exchequers if they use PayPal for their heraldic payments. I've also asked Society Exchequer regarding this twice, and she's supposed to be researching it for me, and I still haven't gotten a response back on how we can use PayPal to process heraldic payments. I also think if we use PayPal to process heraldic payments, the fees will go down. I would advocate for the fees to go down in some ways from the $8 people are currently paying, because we're not using the same methodology in submittals that we used to use when that amount was established. Because at that time they had to make so many copies in black and white and then so many copies in color and send to there. So there was that extra expense on the local group. And so that's why they were taking the extra $1 out. And then it would come up to Kingdom at $7. And then the other thing that I haven't circled back around to, it's kind of unfortunately a little bit lower on some of my to-do list right now because of the end of year reports coming up and everything, is to actually talk with I believe it's the College of Arms, and look at our statement and see how much we're actually being charged for them to process those heraldic submissions.
Yeah.
Because I would like to see, exactly how much the kingdom is being charged for that, to see how much of a margin there is between what we're taking in and what we're expending for an heraldic submission, because I think that needs to be part of the discussion on adjusting the possible fee schedule for heraldic devices. I know that there's been some advocation on restructuring those fees. I know there's 1 or 2 kingdoms that do not charge their populace for heraldic submissions. So there's some different aspects that Elena and I have been trying to research, but in between all the other things that we've been doing. So hopefully there'll be something. I'm hoping to have something in place before I step out in October in regards
That
to
is
that.
one of my husband's pet peeves. He hates the fact that we have to pay for heraldic submissions. He's like, you don't have to pay to get a fighter card. You don't have to pay to get a martial card. He's like, he went around for a while. Free heraldry chanting it. And I was like, babe, you gotta stop.
He would not be the only one. He would
I
have a whole
know.
group of people that would probably join that movement. I know
Probably.
at least 3 or 4 of them here in my own group. And one of them is currently holding a society office who would advocate for that.
I've been so long we've had to mail the submissions. We are now allowed to scan them in JPEG and send them up to Asterisk, the internal submissions, because it was a pain in the butt to get them all together and mail them and try to figure out where the Asterisk,
Uh-huh.
address is. So, and I've been advocating for a while to make it easier to do the submission, especially the submissions form. For the longest time, you had to print out the form, type it, write it in, and then mail it in. And even with the one they have now, the fillable, it doesn't save.
Oh, yeah. See, I received the little heraldic receipts. I get those
Yeah.
sent to me because this is what I reconcile with the check. And then I put in there like where that $7 is coming from. I have to record all that information on my ledger and in my report. And then I scan these receipts. And then I scan these receipts and send them to Asterisk Herald so they know what I've received, what the kingdom has received actual funds for. So this is last year's folders of heraldic submissions.
Wow.
That receipt was implemented because there was so much issues with payments getting processed. So this heraldic submission receipt was implemented before I became Kingdom Exchequer. And I've actually sometimes received the actual submission with this, and I'm like, I don't need that. But I scan it with the receipt and send it on up to Asterisk. And that receipt also allows me to, in some ways, collate back to the report I get from the College of Heralds. So I do get a report from society level back to the kingdoms that say, hey, we have processed these submissions against your account. So we send them basically we send them a certain amount to be banked, and then that's what they will charge submissions against until we get to a certain level, and then we send them another little chunk of money, and they put it in our account and continue to charge again. So it's almost like we have, it's almost like you do your Pike Pass. You pay so much money and they charge against it. So that's what we do with the College of Heralds. We send them so much money, they charge the submissions against it. And then when we get low, we get a low balance. They say, hey, you need to send us some money. And we send them a check.
Wow.
And so, yeah, so that's, I know heraldry
Yeah.
has always been a issue, not only for the heralds, but also for the exchequer, and having that coordination of the client. They work with the herald, they get all their forms together, and then, okay, well, now I got all my forms together, here's the money, and the herald's got to go, nope, you got to go see that person. And so then they have to go deal with the exchequer to actually
Yeah.
submit their payments. And so that whole coordination, I know, is a little clunky. And so
Yeah.
I know there's some of us who would like to make that a little bit smoother.
Yeah, I would, because with that two-step process, one with your exchequer send the money up with the receipt form, and I have to have a receipt with the submissions form, and I scan it and send it like it's clunky.
It is very clunky. I totally agree. So we are working on that. I mean, that is one thing. I mean, probably one of the last things I will say is, generally when I go into an office, I have high expectations of things I'm going to accomplish. You know, you go into an office and you're like, you're one of the goals every time I take an office, one of my goals is to try and make it better by the time I leave. Hopefully I can make it better. Hopefully I don't make it worse. So I at least want to make sure, but the goal going in is to make the office better for whoever comes behind me. Whether that's making a process easier, eliminating a process that's unnecessary, developing some type of publications that make the office a little bit more manageable, you know, just something to improve the office. I've learned with Doomsday. First, I learned this with Doomsday. You'd think, having been Doomsday before being Kingdom Exchequer, I would have learned my lesson. But no, I came into this office with goals and expectations too. And then realizing that the actual process or functionality of the job sometimes does not allow personal goals to be accomplished. And that's not a negative thing, because it may mean that your goals may be changed due to understanding the functionality of the office a little bit better, having been in it, or something else comes up with another officer and your goal gets shifted to a new project, like, okay, let's talk about heraldry, or hey, let's talk about revising this process that is an interactive kind of thing. So I will say, coming into the Kingdom Exchequer office, be prepared for your priorities to possibly shift, or to not have priorities coming in other than fulfilling the day-to-day operations of doing the job, and to come in and kind of learn some of the ins and outs, learn some of the people that you're working with, and then start to develop some, if one of your goals is to hopefully leave the office a little bit better than you came in, start to develop some of those goals after you've gotten in a little bit. I think that will lead to less disappointment or angst and stress on yourself of feeling like you're not accomplishing something, even though you're doing the job, and doing the job, you know, the way it needs to be done, and it needs to be handled, and that things are being taken care of, and that the kingdom is functioning. Because sometimes that in and of itself is making improvements on the job. So
Yeah, absolutely. Well, does anybody have any more questions? We are at 10 after, so.
Good.
Well, thank you guys.
You're good? All right. Yeah,
so
thank
much.
you guys.
And
Thank you very much.
thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for attending.
Yeah, thank you for teaching.
Oh, you're very welcome. I'm listed on the Exchequer officers page on the Kingdom of Anstiora webpage, and I believe that's a link to my email. So if you have any questions at all, or want to know more about the Exchequer office, or any of the deputies, or any more about the Kingdom Exchequer office, feel free to just drop me an email. Like I said, I check my email usually on a daily basis during the week. Sometimes on the weekends, I do take days off, or I kind of leave the weekends free for eventing when that's going to start. But I do try and be very responsive to emails. So please feel free to reach out to me.
We'll see you at
Awesome.
Roundtable.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll be at Roundtable all
Everybody
day in the
have a-
same room.
Thank you.
Woo, I know.
Everybody have
I
a good
know.
You
night.
don't have to travel.
That is true. I don't have to travel. It does make it a little
That's
easier.
true.
So, all right, ladies, you guys have a good evening.
Thank you.
You too.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
Bye-bye.